Enigma is Parametric Systems Automated Application Development Suite. The second video showed how to specify business rules for an application, and how to include them in a program. Also, the actions needed to add data to the database were covered. In this video, creation of the user interface, navigation through the application, and the efficiency tools available in Enigma are described. User interfaces are specified using the original Enigma application. The access is through the ribbon menu, but before it can be used, the application has to be identified. Optionally, the program can also be selected from the 3 vehicle programs that have been defined. For simplicity, the user interface for vehicle find will be considered first. User interface definition is accessed through the Design, User Interface menu selection. This allows 2 alternatives. The current program which has been identified can have its interface specified. Alternatively, selection can be made from all programs specified for the application. This is the user interface definition screen. It has a WYSIWYG design panel containing a grid which gives positional guidance. Initially, this panel will be the default size of the application screen. There is also a panel on the right that provides access to the transactions and data used in the program. It also allows texts to be written for inclusion on the interface, control buttons to be added, and the form and screen for the program to be defined. All of these are required to complete a user interface. The screen title defined for the program is displayed at the top of the screen. For sub-screen programs, this will be displayed above, and centered across the screen size. For internal frames, this will display above and left justified across the screen. The actions specified for the program are now shown as transactions. Most actions use 2 transactions. For each action, only 1 transaction will be shown. This will either show the user some information, or allow the user to enter some information. When the transaction is selected, the data specified in it is listed. Select a data, and the default field is displayed at the top of the design panel. This is formatted according to the data definition of the data. The data definition was described in the first training video. Those details are shown in the data location and format panel. The field is located on the screen by the top and left entries. Use the grid for reference. The location is specified in pixels. Changes can be made to the caption size and the data size. These are defined in pixels and data definitions in characters are approximately converted. Alter to suit the user interface. If multiline is set to yes, any input will be processed as a text area, which allows line feeds and carriage returns to be included, and will wrap long inputs within the field. Otherwise, the data is processed as an input, selection list, checkbox, option group or image, as specified in the original data definition, and will truncate if too long for the field. The field height can be altered from its default. For multi-line fields, the default value is doubled. This should be adjusted to suit the information and the user interface design. Where the information entered or displayed exceeds the size of the text area, scroll bar will be shown so that the excess can be accessed. For images, the display will expand to fill the specified height and width. Set the caption location to suit the user interface design. The input details can be aligned to suit the design. The input status can be altered from the data definition default to make input to the field optional, or to protect the field from input. There are other settings available. The caption and tooltip can be altered. By default, all user interfaces are created with autocomplete set to no. This can be overridden for individual fields. The control buttons record the data location and format definition, or remove the data from the user interface, or cancel any changes made to the definition. These actions also apply to other user interface definitions. Place the data in the screen area. The Select Fixed Text panel will show partial details of any fixed text that has been entered. These can be selected to allow for correction, alteration and repositioning, if necessary. Selection of the Enter New Text string provides an empty panel where a new text definition can be made and a default display area for the text. The text width and height can be adjusted. The area requested is shown by the dotted rectangle. It does not show on the final user interface. Top and left locate the text on the screen. Border will surround the text with a box. Boxes can be defined with no text, so that parts of the user interface can contain outlined groups of related texts and fields. Alignment, bold, italic and points are used to format the text. Padding allows a left margin to be defined so that the text starts some number of pixels to the right of a surrounding box outline. Background is usually set to no to make the background to the text transparent on the screen. With that setting, anything displayed under the text can be seen. Setting background to yes removes the transparency and masks off any underlying formatting. The control buttons have the same functions as described for data. Enter appropriate text to instruct the user and position it on the screen. The text can contain embedded HTML formatting conventions. These can underline, italicize, or bold parts of the text or force carriage return and line feeds into the text. The three control buttons at the bottom of the right-hand panel provide access to other user interface requirements. Button provides a list of all the previously specified buttons and allows new buttons to be specified. Previously specified buttons are identified by showing the button caption in the list. Buttons on a user interface are the primary means of navigation in an Enigma-developed application. Select Enter New Button to get the button definition panel. A button is displayed at the top of the screen area. Enter appropriate values for width, height, top and left to locate the button. Select the function for the button. These will set the button color to green for process the input, red for ignore the input or yellow for access to another program in the application. These colors can be changed and the intensity altered. Use Customize application on the ribbon to access a program where this can be done. Customization is discussed in a later video. Where another program is accessed, any input made to this, or to a previous, user interface will be available to the next program. Being available to the next program does not mean that the data has been recorded in the database. An explicit record function must be selected for the data to be recorded. The caption will display inside the button, and the tooltip can be used to provide some instructions to the user. Transfer to will display a selection list of all the programs already defined in the application. The next program, required by the application, can be selected, and activation of the button will result in a transfer to its user interface. The next program, after vehicle find in the run chart, is vehicle search, so a transfer to it is included. Next program will eventually display a selection list of external programs that have been attached to this application, to which transfer can be done. This is still under development, and will show no list for selection. The three yes/no selections at the bottom of the panel control the processing that happens after the button process, if any, is executed. Yes, in return to parent program will cause this user interface to close, and the previous user interface to be reactivated. Yes, in return to parent program on return from transfer, causes the transfer backward from a transferred to program to continue backward down the calling sequence. Therefore, the programs that have been activated in the application can cascade their return until they reach a program with this setting as no, or to the application menu. Yes, in cancel any auto return through the parent program, allows this button to override a cascading return, specified in the preceding program, if it has been specified for the button causing the transfer. The record, remove and cancel buttons work as previously described. Define and place the required buttons on the user interface. It is optional if a return to this user interface should bypass a redisplay, and return to the menu, or if this user interface should redisplay, to allow another search to be started. No in here will cause a redisplay. Yes will cause a bypass. The form button allows the section of the user interface, that will be sent to the server process, to be defined. Only the data entered into the fields, in the same form as the button, will be sent. Small forms will transmit faster to the server. Use width, height, top and left to define the form area. There can be more than one form on a user interface, but each form will correspond to a transaction in the transaction list for the program. Display form can be set to no, to suppress display of this form, when the program is accessed. However, the form will still display in this mapping process. The form area being defined is shown by a black dashed line. Form areas, that are not being defined, are shown by blue dashed lines. In the top left corner, the transaction identifying the form is displayed in italics. This does not display in the program. The screen button allows the size and position of the user interface to be controlled. Everything defined for the user interface must be positioned within the screen. The screen does not have to fill the available screen area. Small screens will transmit faster from the server to the client. The screen size is shown by the red dashed rectangle. It is there as a guide. If the screen already has a border defined, the dashed rectangle will be black. A border can be set for a screen, if desired. It will be suppressed if the border field is set to 0. The style for the border can be selected. Use the width, height, top and left entries to position the screen around all of the user interface definition. It must include all the form areas. If a screen is repositioned, all the content on the screen will be repositioned at the same time. The buttons available on the screen definition panel are slightly different. Record, cancel and remove are available to control the screen definition. The center button will place the screen centrally, both vertically and horizontally, in the available display area. Programs must include at least one form and a screen, before Enigma will generate the code for the program. Generation will be covered in a later video. Where these are missing, a warning message is displayed. That covers the basics used to define many user interfaces. Clicking on the program name, or the transaction name, will refresh the selections available. The next program is Vehicle Search, and the user interface is different. There were two actions specified for vehicle search, display and show. These translate into a local transaction and a list transaction. The local transaction is used to display the search criteria that controls the information retrieval for the list. It can be formatted as desired. This is the format that I usually use. Select the local transaction and then the data. Position the data in the map and protect it. Record the data location and format. This will return to the transaction and the data list. For many user interfaces another data selection would be made, and it would be located and formatted on the user interface. For this transaction, all the data has been included. Enter a text to instruct the user. Position it above the data field. Record the text location and format. This will return to the transaction and the data list. Add two buttons. One is used to force the entered criteria to be used by the next program. That will be required if the list does not show the required vehicle. Because there is no appropriate vehicle, the next program will be vehicle add. Set the button accordingly. When the user returns from vehicle add, redisplaying this screen is pointless. Set the automatic return, so that redisplay is bypassed. There should also be a way to cancel the program. Set that button as well. If a cascading return was set for vehicle find, then it may be desirable to cancel it if the cancel button is activated. All of the data, text and button fields can be dragged around the screen mapping, grid, area. This can only be done after the data, text or button has been recorded within the grid. Data includes input, selection, checkbox, and option groups. Drag and drop is not the usual drag and drop sequence you may be used to. Click on the field to be dragged. The cursor is now attached to the field, so release the mouse button. The field will move with the cursor until it is dropped by a second mouse click. This movement can take the field out of the displayed area. If it is released there, then the data, text or button location and format have to be reset manually to reposition the field within the grid. If you are working with an already selected data, text or button field, then only that field will be recognized for drag and drop. Otherwise, any field on the grid can be dragged. Mark a form area around the buttons. There is no need to include anything else, since the data cannot be changed. Return to the transaction list by clicking on the displayed transaction, or the transaction heading. Select the list transaction. A very different screen is displayed to control and locate the list. There is a default top and left setting, which places the displayed table over the defined local display. Move the table to a better location. There are 3 rows in the table which have columns for the data included in the show action. This is a default number of rows, and can be changed to suit the height of the application screen, by entering a number of rows. This specifies the number that will be listed on the screen, and does not define the maximum number that could be located from the database. At present that maximum is set at 100 rows. The form required for the list is automatically specified. It displays as the dotted rectangle around the list rows. It will grow or shrink according the number of rows to be displayed, and any controls needed that format below the list. The list cannot be changed in Screen Mapping program. Instead, the Format button can be used, so that the format of the list can be adjusted, and the navigation consequent upon selecting a row in the list, or having no rows selected for the list, can be specified. This screen has 3 panels. The center panel shows the default format for the list. At the top is a list title. It is optional, and will always display in a centered, underlined, uppercase format. Below this, instructions to the user can be entered. These are used a lot if the original Enigma tables are displayed. It is optional, and the amount of vertical space to be allocated can be controlled by setting the instruction lines appropriately. 0 will suppress the instructions display. Below the instructions a table/list name can be entered. It is not optional. The columns to display the information found for the list are shown. The width of the list is controlled by the sum of the width of each column. The right-hand columns are very narrow and are colored. These are the 2 included data selected in their data definition to be never displayed data, and are the 2 key values, vehicle ID and owner ID, that were included in the content of the show action. These will not display on the user interface, but display here so that they can be adjusted if necessary. Wide lists will have a scroll bar displayed, so that columns beyond the right side can be accessed. If the cursor hovers over a column, it will be highlighted. If the column is selected with a mouse click, the heading will remain colored, and the right-hand panel will show the settings for the column display. The settings are fairly obvious, and all have a tooltip to assist you. The 3 that need some explanation are: wrap text, which will cause the display in the column to truncate, if set to no. If set to yes, the row will be made deeper to display any content that will not fit into the column width. Column width allows the column to be set to suit the likely content. The actual width of the column is the greater of the width specified here, or the width of the longest word in the caption. Where the caption has more than one word, the caption will wrap and the height of the column headings will increase. Sort order can be selected. If it is numeric or alphabetic, then the rows will be sorted according to the content of the highlighted field. Only one column can be selected, and the sort is always in ascending order. The number of characters to be used to index the table should be set. When the settings are applied, a go-to control will display. Sort does not need to be specified for any column containing a score. That column will be sorted into descending order when the information for each row is collated from the database. The Clear button will deselect the column and clear the settings. The instruction lines setting makes space for any instructions to be entered. The space for the instruction lines will be included, even if the instructions are blank. Set the value to 0 to prevent this. The instructions do not have to fit in the number of lines specified. A scroll bar will be created to access any instructions that do not fit in the allocated space. The Enter key can be used to force a new line to be started within the instructions. The left-hand panel contains other settings that apply to the table, and the processing to be applied to it. Standard buttons will attach a set of predefined buttons to the table. This is not available when a show action is being formatted. Automatic transfer will display a selection list of all the programs defined for the application. Selection of a row in the table will cause the content of that row to be recorded within the application, and navigation will go to the selected program. In this case it should be vehicle mod, since there is information available. Data source can be either transaction, or NetDB. Transaction is the default, and specifies that the content for each row should come from the application database. NetDB specifies that the content will come from the user database. Database table is only used for lists that have a data source of NetDB. This is rarely used for lists. Its function will be explained later. Show message influences the navigation following the list display. If it is set to yes, then a message will be displayed if no content is found to display in the list. When the message is acknowledged, the navigation will be a return to the preceding program in the navigation sequence. If it is set to no, then the navigation when no rows are displayed, will default to the program selected, to use the criteria in the display form. This setting allows specification requiring some content in the list to be a mandatory, or optional, requirement. A list will also transfer to the automatic transfer program, if there is only one row of content identified by the search criteria. Displaying one row for selection is somewhat annoying to the user. Navigation, through use of a show action, provides 4 alternative paths to the next program. These alternatives are detailed in the user guide, with diagrams similar to this. Pause the video if you want to study the diagram. The Apply button will record the changed settings on the database, and then return to allow more changes to be made. The Record button also records changes on the database, but returns to screen mapping. The Close button can be used to ignore any changes that have not been recorded, and returns to screen mapping. The two mapped transactions can be delineated by a horizontal line, or by having an outline specified, for the local transaction. Both are done in a similar manner. Texts cannot be specified for list transactions. Any required text should be included when the list format is specified. Select the local transaction again. Request a Record New Text screen, and then use top and left to position it. Set the width and height to surround the transaction map, or set the height to 0, to draw a line. Make the border thickness at least 1. Vertical lines can also be drawn, by making the text width 0, and setting a height. Record a blank text. It will show as a blank entry in the list of texts. Use the Screen button to create a screen area that encompasses both mapped transactions. It is time to return. Consider navigation in more detail. Navigation through the application is mainly done by the button settings, and by the show action. In the first of the videos, the run chart for Motokana was shown, and comment was made that the navigation looked very complicated, but Enigma will make it easy. How is this done? Here is the run chart showing the vehicle's programs, and the person programs. Look at person search. There is an apparent tangle of solid lines, which show access into person search, and dashed lines, which show return from person search. Here they are colored in pairs to show the navigation paths. Person search can be accessed from 5 different programs. Each can have search criteria entered. The show action for person will be set so that finding no information, or a forced use of the input criteria, will access person add. Finding some information will either display what is found, or automatically access person mod. When either of those programs is closed, they will return to person search. When that happens, person search will return to the program that accessed it. This is automatic, and is how the tangle of access into person search is made simple by Enigma. From a design viewpoint, if the application already has a key value for something, then the mod program for that something can be directly accessed. Where there is no known key, then the search program should be accessed, to locate the correct key value, or to create a record with a new key value. The next program on the run chart is vehicle add or vehicle mod. But before they are mapped, the BR class program that uses a rules action will be considered. This action translates to a table transaction. The content of the table transaction has to be specified, to design the decision table, that will contain the rule. Decision tables have a very similar structure to the lists, and the same programs are used to design them. Set a location for the decision table, and the number of rows that will be displayed. This is a maximum number that will display at one time. If the y-axis alternatives exceed this maximum, a scroll bar will allow access to the overflow. Every decision table has a predefined set of buttons to access the generated code, for the maintenance of the entries that define the rule. Once the changes to the table are recorded, or are cancelled, the data specification for every column is displayed. These fields will be used to record the action to be taken for every x and y axis intersection. This recording is done in the new application, and allows maintenance of the decision table to be done by the user. These should be adjusted to make input to the field mandatory. They can be placed in a row beneath the table format, with the caption placed above the field. Set the caption to suit the column heading, which will probably be changed to a more meaningful text. The location and size of the fields may be wider than the table. They can be placed to the left of the table format, or to the right. The form will be adjusted to include these fields. They can be defined over the new button. Whenever these fields are displayed, the new button will be hidden. Changes to the location, and/or the number of rows, will automatically adjust any button, data and form specifications to maintain their locations relative to the table. Where the y-axis column is a selection list, it will be formatted, so that the y-axis alternatives can be selected. Where destination of the content at the x and y-axis alternatives, which was data name 3 in the decision table specification, is a selection list, that selection list should be attached to every x-axis field. This will keep the result of evaluating the decision compatible with data name 3. Each row in the decision table has an active/inactive indicator. The remove and reinstate buttons control this setting. Inactive rows are not used in the evaluation of the logic. That column is set to be invisible by default and does not need to be formatted as part of the table screen. All rows that are entered in the new application are active by default. Use format to access the decision table alternatives. The BR class rule was specified to contain two columns. By default, the caption for the y-axis is the data name assigned to data name 1. The y-axis is the first column in the decision table. All the other columns are in the x-axis. The caption for the x-axis columns can be the selections entered into a drop-down selection list, or the program name prefixed by a sequential number, going from left to right, in the decision table. Select the database table that will record the decision table details. The caption for the y-axis column should be changed from the default to a meaningful text. The captions for the x-axis should be left as the default if the find by method to locate the x-axis column is position. Otherwise, the caption should be changed to the value that will identify the correct column. For the default method, the caption can be anything, since default always uses the first x-axis column. Return to the mapping program, and define the screen for the decision table. The next program to have a user interface mapped will be Vehicle Add. It has a quantity of fields that need to be formatted, and several buttons to control the navigation. Select Owner accesses a version of the person search program, using whatever has been entered into the owner fields, as the criteria to control the database access. This requires a duplication of the person search program, which will be covered later. The other buttons are obvious. When the mapped screen is generated into the program, Tab will move the focus from left to right, line by line through the map. The area defined for the form must include all the fields where information can be input, plus all of the control buttons. The screen size must be set to include everything. As you may have noticed in the second training video, when the actions for Vehicle Add were specified, there was repetition in the content for the provide and record actions. Replication is a way of using existing specifications to create new specifications. There are 3 replication facilities in the original Enigma. They can be accessed using the replication section of the ribbon menu. The action selection allows the information specified for one transaction in an action to be replicated into a different transaction in the same, or a different action. The different action may be in the same program, or in a different program. Actions often contain 2 transactions. Only the main transaction can be replicated. The other has to be specified using the Enigma 2020 interface. Replicated transactions must be connected with an existing program. By default, in Enigma 2020 the transaction name is the same as the name of the program in which it is used, unless the whole program is replicated. So, the first process is to start a new program. The action selection provides a list of transactions where one can be selected. The go-to control will accept a keystroke and the list will reposition accordingly. The vehicle mod program is very similar to the vehicle add program, so the transactions can be replicated with only a small change being made. When a transaction is selected, the transaction details are displayed. Select the new program name, action, and transaction type. Replicate and return to the transaction list. Replicate the next transaction. The next replication requires a small change. The record action has to become a change action, since the vehicle mod program is intended to allow editing of the vehicle details. Return to the Enigma 2020 interface. The attached transactions are shown and can be selected. The logic transaction is complete. The provide action has no control specification. It should contain the same data as was specified for provide in vehicle add. The change action has no return specification. It should contain the same data as was specified for record in vehicle add. Replication has created the specification for a new program, with very little detailed selection being required. Programs can be replicated to produce an identical copy of the original program. This is useful, where lists of the same information need to navigate to different programs, depending upon some application design decision. The replicated program is not mapped during the replication process. Therefore, the navigation can be different for the original and replicated program. It is not clear where this facility fits within Enigma 2020, and it has been suppressed. Please refer to the user guide for instruction on the use, within the original Enigma. Where the user is presented with the same information in two different programs, the user interface for one program can be replicated to the other. For example, programs that record and change information or programs that record and display information can be replicated. Once replicated, each program will have its own user interface. This can be adjusted using the Design, User Interface facility. Usually, the adjustment is made on displayed texts to make them more relevant to the replicated screen, or to add, or remove, button controls, or to button captions to make them relevant to the buttons function, or to change the navigation using button, or list selections. Vehicle add has been mapped. Vehicle mod has been created from vehicle add, so vehicle mod can be mapped using replicate UI. Select vehicle add from the mapped program details. Enter V in the UN mapped go-to, and select vehicle mod from the list. Use the vehicle mod, change, mod transaction because it was replicated from the vehicle add, record, add transaction. Unmapped provide transactions can also be replicated, from record or change transactions. This would be done if the application wanted display only, inquiry programs. Replicating a screen map is very quick, compared to creating one using screen mapping. If there are changes to be made, access the new screen using Design, User Interface. The new screen will display in the same location as the original. It has all the original controls included and each control has maintained its original settings. These may not be what is required, but changing a replicated map is usually faster than creating a new map. This has concluded all that needs to be done to specify the various types of user programs in an application, and the navigation through the application. The next video will cover changing the specified requirements into an operational program, and installing it into the new application.